Folklore in the Massachusetts Renaissance Fair. I'm Tal Good, and I'm really excited to be here. I would not say I'm the ultimate authority on fairies or folklore, but it is something I've always been interested in since my sister and I got really into it when we were kids, watching The Labyrinth and all of the Dark Crystal and all the fun movies that incorporate a lot of fairies and folklore into them. Today we're going to be discussing a lot of things. We're going to be going into some history and mythology. And then when some people hear fairies, they think, ooh, fun thing for little kids. This might be a little dry for some of the younger kids, but I am going to keep it family friendly, which, believe it or not, is really difficult when you're actually talking about fairies and the history behind them. So I hope that some of you will stick around and we can have some Q&A at the end of this. I do have some books I want to show you at the end of this, but otherwise I'm just going to be showing PowerPoint and talking. Hopefully that's not too dry for you. If you're interested in the subject, you might find the PowerPoint kind of neat. I hope. Please go easy on me. Alright, so we're going to jump in. So I figured I'd start this off by explaining who I am. I am the entertainment coordinator for the Massachusetts Renaissance Faire, which means that I actually hire all the outside performances like jugglers and musicians and all the fun things that you go and see at the fair. I try to make sure there's fun activities for people to do. I schedule everything. I actually also play in a group called Below the Gaff, which you heard the music earlier. I play upright bass and we dress up as pirates and we have lots of fun. I have a master's in English with a writing specialization. My master's thesis was on Faerie Folklore. My undergraduate thesis was on pirates, specifically Grace O'Malley, the Pirate Queen. I have written a young adult fantasy novel called Fairy Blood, Song of the Lark, which you can find on Amazon or you can find it at imminentbanterpublishing.com. And I also have More for All Ages, Land of the Ever Young, a comic series, which is also on Imminent Banter Publishing. My sister and I got into fairies and folklore when we were very young from watching a lot of really awesome movies like The Labyrinth and Dark Crystal, which I will talk about in a little bit. If you have done some of your own research, you would have heard of some of these people. If you would like to do more of your own research, then I figured I would throw in some sources that you could look up and enjoy reading about. The first one is William Butler Yeats. A lot of people would know him as a very famous poet from Ireland. He also collected Irish folk tales, and I will be showing you some of these books at the end, so you get to see what they look like if you want to order them. Next is Lady Francesca Speranza Wilde. Yes, crazy name. She had a lot of aliases because it was difficult for women to get published back then. She happened to be Oscar Wilde's mom. Oscar Wilde, who wrote A Picture of Dorian Gray, among other things, and was famous for being arrested for being gay and being a proponent for gay rights. His mom also was a proponent for gay rights, which is really awesome. She went around and collected a bunch of Irish folktales and fairy folktales and put them in a book, which makes it great for us because then we can read them. Next, you can see the picture down on the bottom right. That would be me and my sister with Brian and Wendy Froud. We were super excited to meet them. We got to go to New York and hang out with them when the Troll book came out, which I will show you the Troll book at the end. The two of them have written a bunch of books. Brian Froud illustrates them with really amazing artwork, and Wendy does a lot of the research into the folklore behind it. They also made Labyrinth and Dark Crystal. Well, we could go on and on and on, but maybe I'll talk about them later. Next, very important, is Catherine Briggs. She probably had the biggest influence on me, and I think most others who write about fairy folklore. She was the head of the Folklore Society for a very long time before she passed away. She is an expert or authority. She's probably the authority on fairy folklore, especially from Ireland. And unfortunately, her books are very expensive. Most of them are several $100s. If you want her whole collection, it's $800. I don't own them. I have the one. There is one on Amazon that is only $20 for some reason, or around there. So I will show you that one because I would definitely suggest getting the one book that is not crazy expensive. Now, a lot of people get confused by the different ways that fairy is spelled. It can be spelled with an I or an E or an IE, and it could be called fae or fae folk or fair folk. Any of those are correct. Fairies come from all over. They're from different places. They can be from different languages, and I don't see why people make a big deal out of the spelling. It doesn't matter. We understand what it means. The common misconception about fairies is that they're little tiny things, little pixies with wings, that they only come from Ireland or England. And I think that probably came from the popularity of Peter Pan's Tinkerbell. A lot of people just see fairies as Tinkerbell, and though she is very famous, that's not what fairies are. Fairies are all different kinds of creatures, not just little tiny pixies with wings. Up here, the picture is another book that you can order if you play music. It is the She Jam that we play at the Market of the Moons. It is a bunch of easy tunes that you can find at Imminent Banter Publishing, or you can buy it at our fair. It's a nice book that my dad actually put together. So, what are fairies? Fairies are mystical spirits. They're magical creatures. They're from all over the world. They're not just from one place. And where did they come from, though? Fairies are basically just somebody wanted to explain the unknown. They didn't have science. A lot of people had terrible things happening to them, and they needed some sort of explanation. An example would be if one person, all their cattle died all of a sudden. They didn't understand that there were diseases that could be picked up. They didn't know where they were coming from, so they needed an explanation, and they made up a creature called a puka. Now, puka can change into different kinds of animals. A lot of the times it would be goats or cats, but also horses, and so when somebody's animals all started dying, they would decide that it was a puka that came in and made them all sick, and then they all passed away because the puka was obviously evil. Now, that's why a lot of fairies are sort of malevolent or evil. It's because they're explaining problems or things that happened that people couldn't figure out why they happened. Now, why am I getting into all this? Well, all of this has influenced my writing for the acts that go on at the festival, but also I want to sort of enlighten people to the history and to the mythology behind all these creatures. So next I'm going to actually talk about some of the different creatures that exist that are fairies, that people might be surprised are fairies, and that way you might know a little bit more about where the writing is coming from and where the creatures are coming from that you will be meeting at the festival. I started my research on fairies in Ireland. That's not to say that Ireland is the only place where there are fairies, but there are a bunch of different types of fairies in Ireland, so I wanted to just talk about a few of them. There are way more than I could possibly list, but here's some of the fun ones. We have leprechauns. Leprechauns people think of with St. Paddy's Day, little tiny creatures that have pots of gold at the end of a rainbow. Next, there's banshees. Banshees are sort of wailing spirits that can prophesize somebody's death coming. It's kind of interesting where they may have came from. They think that banshees came from when someone would die and they didn't have any relatives, that women would actually be hired to cry at the person's grave. Well, since no one knew who these women were, it started to come around and people started to say, wait a second, I think those are spirits that are grieving over the dead, which is kind of cool. Next, you see the Dullahan here, which is probably familiar to you from Sleepy Hollow, the Headless Horseman. Dullahan is basically a creature that holds his head in his hand and rides a horse and throws it at you, and if you are hit with it, it feels like cottage cheese when it hits you for some reason, and it is supposed to say that you are going to die soon. Next we have the Cat Sith. This is one of my favorites. Pretty much every culture all around the world seems to have some sort of dark, foreboding black cat that is malicious and tells you of some doom coming. I have black cats, and I think they're adorable and wonderful, and I don't think they have anything to do with doom or prophesizing or evil, but it just seems to be a common theme throughout the world. Next, pukas, we talked a little bit about. Pukas can turn into different animals. Oddly enough, or interestingly enough, there is a pagan ritual that people might still do where they burn effigies, tend to be wooden effigies of animals, which is to ward off the pukas, to keep your animals safe. Unfortunately, many years ago, they used to actually burn real animals inside the effigies, which is very sad. Next, we have selkies. As you can see, they kind of look like mermaids, but they're more seal-ish. A lot of the water fairies tend to drag people under into the water and drown them. That was a way of people, again, to explain why people were drowning. Changelings, a lot of people know changelings. Changelings are basically, if your baby's acting mean or upset, it's probably because it was switched with a fairy and your baby is elsewhere. Now, the next slide, I just wanted to show all of the citations of where I got those pictures. I do not own those pictures. They are somebody else's work, so you can find them and tell them that you like their work. I did not draw any of those. On to other countries with fairies, we have Germany. In Germany, you have elves, dwarves, kobolds, and the Earl King. Some of you might be saying, wait a second, elves and dwarves? Those aren't fairies. Well, they are. They're fairy folklore from Germany. The Earl King's a really interesting character shown here. You can see him in a bunch of other literature, one of which is Jim Butcher's Dresden Files. If you like fairy folklore, you should definitely read those. They're really fun books. There's a lot of them, and the writing is great. Alright, so another country, Scotland, or also England, they have goblins, redcaps, brownies, gnomes. Right here's a little brownie doing some chores. Brownies will clean your house and do nice things for you if you are good to them, if you leave some milk and honey outside for them, or if you leave it where you think they are, as long as you don't look at them. Redcaps, more malicious. They tend to guard keeps. They dye their hats in the blood of those that they have killed. Goblins, we all know, kind of malicious little creatures. And gnomes, I'm sure you've seen, like David the Gnome, and people put them on their lawns. Little lawn gnomes, they're derived from that. Next, we have Norway and Sweden, where you would have trolls, some of my favorite. We have trolls at our fairy festival. We have had a troll that woke up when he was supposed to be asleep and sort of went around causing havoc and mischief until the fairies were able to help get him to go to sleep. We also have Nice. We're going to have one this year, one of our new fairies. Nice, you've probably seen, they kind of look like Santa Claus. They come from Sweden, and people like to put them out on their decks or out places during wintertime, because Nice will bring them little presents. France, we have Red Dwarf. If you've ever seen the show, I don't think it has anything to do with it. White Lady, Luton, Tarrasques. If you happen to be a Dungeons & Dragons fan, you've definitely heard of the Tarrasque, which is a little bit different in Dungeons & Dragons. It's this unstoppable giant beast, not so much in fairy folklore, but it is a beast. Will-o-wisps are pretty interesting. Will-o-wisps are in a lot of different cultures. They are these little creatures that resemble lights, and when people follow them, they are bringing them out to marshes and to swamps to, unfortunately, do bad things to people, as opposed to bringing them out to where they want to go, and people would follow them thinking they were the lights of a city or someone that was trying to help them. Very unfortunate. Next, I want to go all the way to Japan, where you will see yokai. Those are the spirits that are basically like fairies in Japan. They are all different types of creatures, just like all the different ones that we are seeing in all these other countries. You have Oni, which I have a picture here. We are going to have an Oni at our fair. Onis have horns and sharp teeth, and they tend to defend places. They're big and strong and kind of scary. Kitsunes, fox spirits, I would love to have one of those at the festival. They tend to be tricky and have multiple tails. Tengu, you have the crow creatures, kappa, turtle creatures, and tanuki, which I think a lot of you might know from Mario, the tanuki tail. Next we have Native American. I think it's pretty important to talk about Native American spirits and creatures. It's hard to find a lot of the folklore on Native Americans because they haven't written all of it down, but there's some which is really interesting. There's the pukwudgies, which there's a picture here with the spikes, and they also defend the woods. They're little creatures. The Thunderbirds and Wendigos. You might recognize some of these names from the new Harry Potter houses because the Harry Potter houses are in Massachusetts, and these characters, or the creatures rather, come from Native American folklore from Massachusetts. It's nice to have it from where we live. Next, Russia, Poland, Lithuania. The Leshy, which is pictured here, is sort of a forest spirit. It guards forests. It looks like it's small until you get close to it, and then you realize they're large, and they're very territorial, obviously. The Bannock, and of course the Baba Yaga. Everybody loves Baba Yaga. She's a witch, or she's a fairy. She has a house with little chicken legs that runs around. So many stories about the Baba Yaga. The Baba Yaga is always doing evil things, sort of like the boogeyman in different countries. She's all throughout Europe. Very interesting character. Now, the list goes on and on. I didn't actually talk about every single one of those in depth. There's so many different types of fairies. I just wanted to show everyone that there's all these different types of creatures, that there's so much mythology that we can pull from to bring into our fair, and I'm slowly sort of bringing a lot of these creatures into the fair and showing people that there is a lot of different things going on, that it's not just little pixies with wings. Now I wanted to get into a little bit of what my actual thesis was about, just because I think it's interesting, and again, it's where my background is coming from in writing some of these stories that you will be seeing different fairies performing at the Massachusetts Renaissance Fair. Well, for starters, fairies, all of the different creatures are a sort of a conglomerate of different stories from all over the world. Everyone borrows from everyone. Fairies do not just come from one place, and these stories have been mixed and changed. And what I was really interested in is the mythology and how a lot of it ends up being about the land of the dead. So you can see that in a lot of different things, but one way that you can see it is in Chaucer's. If you've ever read any of Chaucer, he has some different stories, and one of which is the Knight's Tale. In the Knight's Tale, he calls Hades and Persephone, which you would know as the god and goddess of the underworld, he calls them the king and queen of fairy. Kind of interesting, a little bit of crossover there. Now, also in November Eve, which is a very popular fairy story, you can see that the fairies bring back ghosts. They bring back the dead to end up seeing their family members and things like that, and you have to watch out for it too, and you shouldn't sleep outside on November Eve. Well, that's actually in Catherine Briggs' book, if you end up getting it. November Eve is Halloween, so some interesting crossovers there. Now, the biggest one that I wanted to talk about was in two different stories that are actually the same story. The Celts have a story called King Orfeo, which you may have heard. King Orpheus, which is very similar name, but King Orpheus you've probably heard plays and operas and all the different things that people have written about it. In King Orfeo, a man's wife falls asleep outside and she's kidnapped by the fairies. He plays some music for the fairies to allow them entrance to their world, and then he is told when he gets there not to eat or drink anything or he'll be stuck there forever. Well, same thing happens in King Orpheus, if you know that story. His wife falls asleep outside. She gets taken by the god of the underworld. He plays music to gain access to the underworld, and then he's told not to eat or drink anything or be stuck there. Well, Faerie Folklore is all about things that have happened in this mythology. You don't want to eat or drink any food in the fairy world, or you would get stuck there. Don't fall asleep outside. Well, the god Hades was the god of death and sleep, because the Greeks thought that they were pretty much the same thing, that when you fell asleep it was like being dead. Well, don't fall asleep outside. It's fair game for the fairies, also for the underworld apparently. Music plays such a big role in fairy stories. It's hard to say where this came from. It could have been that the Greeks borrowed stories from the Celts, or vice versa, but probably a mix of the two. Music entices fairies. Fairies will generally get into a contest with you. If you challenge them to a music contest, they will come out and listen to your music. Now the fun one, can you think about a fiddle contest that was a very important one? Well, there's so many stories about the devil and the magical fiddle contest for someone's soul. That is straight up a fairy folk story. That story about the devil is taken from fairy folklore. So it's kind of interesting how all of these different stories mingle together and sort of become new creations, but also take from one another. Another interesting thing is fairies have an allergy to iron, they always say. They think that actually came from jinn or genies, another thing that gets borrowed from other cultures. Hopefully you have bared with us up to this point, because now I'm getting to how this relates to our fair. Well, here is the character of Puck. Puck now we say is a satyr. I will get into that a little bit. But here you can see 4 different Pucks that we've had. I unfortunately call it the curse of the Puck. We have had a different person play Puck every single year. Something happens and we end up with a new one. It's pretty crazy. I mean, a lot of our actors and actresses, they like to keep the roles that they have and they come back year after year. But Puck is the curse of the Puck. I even didn't write Puck into one of the stories just because I didn't want to have to see another one leave. Alright, so Puck comes from Midsummer Night's Dream. I'm sure a lot of you know that, by William Shakespeare. The character that I'm using comes from that. Now, like I said, everyone takes from everyone. That's where a lot of these stories come from, but the problem is Disney. Why am I saying this? Well, copyright. There didn't used to be copyright. Shakespeare was able to take from all these other stories and add them into his stories and make these really rich, really great tales that people could read and that would live on through the ages. Unfortunately, Disney wanted to keep all their characters. They didn't want anyone else using them, so they made copyright last 100 years, and no one can use anything from Disney without being sued. I think it's stupid. I understand that they want to make money, but I think they've made enough and they can relax a little bit. Like how we can't use Tinkerbell because Disney has copyright on that. But we have a workaround, which I'll tell you about in a little bit. So the mythology for Puck derived from satyrs and Pan, which is Greek mythology. Now, what is a satyr? A satyr, or some people say satyr, is a male nature spirit with the ears and tail of a horse, not a goat. So it's a little weird. Unfortunately, I couldn't put any pictures up because the pictures of them are R-rated. They are not family-friendly pictures of these creatures. When you go into Greek mythology, they seduce nymphs, and you can kind of use your imagination there. They're companions to Dionysus, the god of wine and theater, and, of course, fertility. They love music, dancing, wine, and women, which you will see in our Puck. Our Puck definitely loves music and dancing and drinking. So how are satyrs different from Pan? Well, Pan is the god of the wilds, mountains, shepherds, music. Pan has goat-like features, which Puck does. Legs of the goat, horns of a goat, not a horse. Pan plays the pan flute. Who plays that instrument? Oh yeah, Puck does. And unfortunately, there's kind of a messed up history behind the pan flute in Greek mythology. There was a nymph who thought that Pan wanted to be with her. She didn't want to be with him. She ran away, and her sisters turned her into a reed. And so Pan didn't want her to get away. He went and found all the reeds. He wasn't sure which one was her. He cut all of them, turned them into a flute, so he was walking around with her all the time, which is kind of upsetting. Now, Marf's Puck is not that dark. We are more family friendly, especially during the day. We have 2 different courts that have been in most of our different festivals that we've run, but there's actually 4 of them, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But Puck is part of the summer court, obviously. Puck loves music and carries the panpipes, but definitely not the panpipes that were made of a person, probably just reeds that Puck made. Puck likes to play pranks on people and tends to be mischievous. Our Puck has been a villain on multiple occasions and will continue to be, but more in a lighthearted sense. And some of the other characters and creatures at the festival tend to help Puck out when Puck's in trouble, and they have more of a sympathetic sort of ear towards Puck when Puck needs help. Now I wanted to talk about our sort of mythology in our own festival. Well, at our fair, we have the fairy courts, and there are 4 of them, for each of the seasons. What's really funny is that when I was writing my book many, many years ago, I thought I was being so clever, making the different seasons, the different courts, and having all these different fairies from mythology being kings and queens of the different courts, and then here comes White Wolf Changelings, a newer edition, and they do the exact same thing. So I guess it wasn't really that novel of an idea. If you're into fairies, White Wolf Changeling is really fun and has a lot of different mythology behind it. Also, the Dresden Files that I mentioned, he decided to make winter and summer 2 different courts that were sort of fighting each other, and a lot of other people have done similar things. I think Holly Black did that too, with 2 different courts that were summer and winter, with Queen Titania as one of them and Mab as the other, and made one of them Seelie and one of them Unseelie. Well, I don't do Seelie and Unseelie. If you're not familiar with those terms, Seelie tend to be the sort of good fairies that do bright, happy things, but they also had some sort of darker things that they would tend to do to humans, and the Unseelie would be the openly dark court, but might also do nice things. So the ideas of those are very nuanced, and I think that it would be confusing for a lot of people, so I don't even involve them in the festival. I don't think we really need them. But if people ask, I would say probably the winter court would be Unseelie and the summer court would be Seelie. Now, the 2 main courts that we have focused on, because our festival is in the summer, is the summer and winter court, and sort of the fights that goes on between the 2 of them. The winter court is ruled by Queen Mab. Her character comes from Shakespeare. He mentioned Mab in Romeo and Juliet, but the name actually derived from Celtic and Welsh mythology. There was a fairy that was the queen of the fairies, and that was Queen Mab. Her character in our festival is very strong. She is cold sometimes because she's the queen of winter, but her court really loves her, and they would do anything for her, not just because she's scary. Next, we have the summer court, which is ruled by King Oberon and Queen Titania, obviously from Midsummer Night's Dream, but Shakespeare got some of his Midsummer Night's Dream characters from different places, and Oberon actually comes from German mythology. Now, in our festival, King Oberon has recently gone missing due to maybe making Queen Mab a little angry, and so Queen Titania is looking for him, and she's doing her best to rule over the summer court, but she has a lot of very kind of flippant fairies that she's working with, and Queen Titania is a very sweet-seeming character, but she has been known to take people and things and people that she wants. She'll just take what she wants, and you might never see it again. Next, the other 2 courts that haven't really been seen that much are the
spring and fall court. The spring court we are going to actually introduce this year. You will see some of the spring court in our digital fair that I hope you will tune into. The spring court is ruled by King Alberic, who is a young-looking kid, even though he's actually very old. Alberic comes from German mythology, and that's where the name Oberon came from originally, so I decided to name it for our spring ruler. Alberic is interested in new things, in technology, in fun things, and may seem like a brat. We'll see. But he is actually the ruler of the spring court. Next, we have the fall court, which hasn't really come into play much yet, but we have King Finnvara and Queen Una. Now, those are names that come from a lot of folklore as the King and Queen of Faerie. They are in November Eve, obviously, the fall season fairies. So they are the rulers of the fall court. We've had a couple fall fairies come in every once in a while, but they haven't been around much, and they've basically loved harvest and food and drink and all the things that make up the fall. So you will see them eventually coming into play at our festival. So let's talk a little bit more about the courts. The summer court, we have a lot of different characters. We mentioned King Oberon and Queen Titania. King Oberon, we didn't really talk about too much. He has shown that he loves his queen very much, but he also has a propensity for mermaids, and he sings songs to them. We might get into that someday later. We have Moth, who is our sort of town crier. Moth announces everything and flits about as a moth would, runs all over, gets very excited about things. We have Cobweb, who is our older advisor sort of fairy who helped raise Oberon, knows a lot of things, but is also hard of hearing and forgetful, might not be able to tell you all the information that you want to know, or might purposely not tell you all the information you want to know. Down here on the bottom left here, the first person there with the mug in her hand is Mustard Seed, a very vibrant character at our festival. Mustard Seed loves drinking. She's the advisor to Queen Titania. She tells stories, but tends to be a little bit drunk. We have Puck, which I already talked about, and where Puck's character came from. All of those characters come from Midsummer Night's Dream, their names, but I've changed them to make a little bit more sense at our fair and sort of grow into their own thing. I mentioned before the workaround for Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell's original name was actually Tipsy before the stories were published the way that they are. So our Tinkerbell type character that is going to be introduced at our digital fair this year is Tipsy. She's an adorable little fairy, and I hope that all of you will enjoy meeting her and talking to her. Next, we have the Winter Court. The Winter Court is, as we said, ruled by Queen Mab. She is a very kind of scary queen sometimes, but also really generous to her different fairies and knows what's going on most of the time, more so than some of the other fairy creatures. I tried to take a lot of the other fairies from Scandinavian, Swedish, Norwegian folklore, places where it's colder. It makes more sense to have fairies in the Winter Court from colder mythologies. We have Jack Frost, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, and Jack Frost pictured over on the right here with the white hair. Jack Frost likes to play pranks on everyone, throw snow, and is generally a lot of fun at the fair. We have a new character, Felix, who I mentioned was a Nessie, who's coming in and will be also joining us on the digital fair to basically work with Jack Frost and do a lot of fun things. Next, we have these original characters that I created. Aster is the royal advisor to Queen Mab. He's in the center over on the right, and Mab likes to sort of use him as, I don't want to say her whipping boy, but she yells at him quite a lot to try to get different things done. He is the self-proclaimed authority on all things human and mortal, and he knows a lot about different courts. We also have Lumi and Ivy, who might be easily mixed up, but they're actually a little bit different, or a lot bit different. Lumi is a fairy who wants to be the royal advisor to Queen Mab and wants to know everything about the courts and tries to suck up to Queen Mab all the time, but it doesn't tend to work out. Lumi also is very good at dancing and organizing important dances for festivals. Ivy, on the other hand, no one listens to and is sort of flighty, but actually ends up knowing a lot of information that people don't really expect her to know. So those are the two courts that we have dealt the most with at our festival so far. What is the Market of the Moons? Well, the Market of the Moons is our fairy festival. It happens once a year in Massachusetts. I'm sure a lot of you have read different folklore and stories where a magical market appears and disappears, shows up at different places. You have the Goblin Market, you have a bunch of things like that. Well, our market appears for 2 weekends in Massachusetts. It disappears, it goes to different lands, it goes to different places, and then it comes back. So it gathers creatures from all over, and they all end up in one place, and then it disappears again. So you have to be careful not to stay too long so that you don't get caught up with the rest of the fairies. Well, over here you can see pictured the summer and winter court. You can see a picture of some of the goings-on at our festival. This year it's going to be a digital festival, which will be a little bit different, but it should still be a lot of fun all the same. Now, I did want to say that I also like to incorporate other characters from different types of literature. Now, I have incorporated in the past Captain Hook and Smee, which you can see pictured over here. That's actually them at our pirate festival, which if you can't come to our Market of the Moons festival or our digital fair, then you should definitely come to our Haunted Hills Pirate Festival, which happens in the fall in Chesterfield. It's around Halloween time. Super fun. But here you can see Smee and Hook. They invaded our Market of the Moons one year, and they caused a lot of mischief. On the other side, we have our Arthurian legend characters. We have Merlin, Tristan, and King Uther. Uther and Merlin, and maybe another one, will be in our digital fair this year. Now, the reason I'm using these specific characters from literature is that they already have fairy mythology in their books. They have a lot of things about fairies. It's, obviously Tinkerbell and all the other fairies in Peter Pan, and then Arthurian legend, you have the Lady of the Lake, you have Morgan Le Fay, you have a bunch of other characters that have fairy backstories, so I wanted to kind of include them, and they have done some interesting things at our festival, and they will continue to maybe cause some mischief. Well, this is pretty much where I'm going to end all of my talking. I hope you maybe found it interesting and not too dry. I have here a picture of our jousters, who are really amazing. You can see them at our fair if you are able to make it out to it someday. We are going to be having our digital fair, though, on July 25th and 26th and August 1st and 2nd. You can check it out on our Facebook or massrenfair.com to get the links for that digital fair. If you like the music that you're hearing, that is actually my pirate band, Below the Gaff. You can find us at belowthegaff.com, and we have CDs of some pretty awesome music. You want to check us out? I will finish off by showing some books of some of the folklorists that I talked about, and then I'm probably going to stick around for some Q&A. Thank you for listening.
Okay, so there were some books that I wanted to show you guys on the screen. You might notice that I'm wearing a different outfit and everything. I had to record this at different points in time because I have a 2-month-old and he needs things, and it's difficult for me to get everything done at once. So the first person that we talked about was Yeats, and this is a really great book. It is Irish fairies and folklore. You can find this pretty much anywhere if you go to any used bookstore, or if you want to get it online, you can find it. Really great book. We talked about Lady Wilde and how awesome she was. You can find her book, Ancient Legends, Mystic Charms, and Superstitions of Ireland. Also, probably find it online. Really great. Has tons of stories. They're really good. Next, I wanted to mention Carol Rose's Encyclopedia, Spirits, Fairies, Leprechauns, and Goblins. A lot of fun stuff in there. Hopefully you can see these, and my camera's picking them up. It's just my laptop camera is not the best in the world. You can see my lovely cat Sith over here. And, of course, we have, this one I didn't mention, Thomas Knightley's The World Guide to Gnomes, Fairies, Elves, and Other Little People. That's a great one. And it's actually, I think, my sister's, so when she sees this, she might be like, hey, wait a second. Give that back. No, I stole it. And, of course, this was the very, very important book by Catherine Briggs that I mentioned that you can find online. This is the only one that you might actually be able to find for less than $100. It's Fairies in Tradition and Literature. Really great book. Now, of course, I mentioned the Frouds. Love Brian and Wendy Froud. This one's probably my favorite. It's just called Fairies. A lot of people have good and bad fairies, but I think this one has better stories in it. And, of course, Brian Froud's artwork is amazing. If you don't have this book and you're into fairies, you need to buy this book. I have some of his artwork on my wall. I have a lot of his stuff. Sorry, cat sis. Now, Trolls is the book that when it came out we went and got to meet them. They signed our books, which was super nice of them. And there's some amazing artwork in this. You get a chance to look at Trolls. It looks very dark crystal-y. A very, very cool family. There's some of the puppets in here too that they make. Brian and Wendy both make the puppets, but also, well, Brian tends to draw them. Wendy and their son, Toby, who is actually the baby in the labyrinth, how weird is that, makes the puppets, and they now make the puppets for the new Dark Crystal that came out on Netflix. Well, this has been my long conversation about fairies and folklore in the Massachusetts Renaissance Fair. I hope that many of you will be able to see our digital fair, and I hope that maybe some of you will come to the fair and stop by and say hello to me or any of the other fairies. We would love to meet you. Thank you for listening. I hope this wasn't too boring. I'm going to try to stay after for some Q&A.